Hiya 10, it's Miss Albie here. By popular demand, I am going to do another model from the Quotation drill booklet. This time I'm using the Macbeth booklet instead of the A Christmas Carol booklet. You will see that there's loads of different quotations here for you to unpick. And I will say, yes, use my model, of course. But also, if you struggle at all with any of these quotations, and you think, you know what it is, I just don't really understand the language of that quotation, then just type it into Google and have a read through some of the analysis online or watch some YouTube videos online. You know, every one of these quotations have been chosen because we know that they will allow you to analyse very closely and in a lot of detail. So the same can be said on the internet, that any of these quotations that you put into a search engine, loads of analysis will pop up, and it's just up to you really to read through that analysis and decipher what parts you would like to use. So I have actually already filmed this live, and I mean, never mind too long for Instagram. It was too long for YouTube. I didn't even know YouTube had a limit. So you are now going to get the finished version, and I'm just going to read through my notes with you. And then hopefully it won't be 27 minutes like it was when I did it live. Okay, so I'm going to start with the first box, which is this box here. And it asks you to think about who or what is the quotation about, what does the quotation mean, and what does it suggest. So if I just zoom out and have a look at the quote itself, really popular one, look like the innocent flower but be the serpent under it. Now this is a quotation that a lot of people use, they memorize. That's great because there's so much you can say about it, but just make sure that you do have a lot to say about it and you make those contextual links that I will mention in relation to some of these boxes here. Okay, so back to the first box then, and who is the quotation about? Well, it's about Macbeth and the lines delivered from Lady Macbeth, okay? And essentially what she's doing is she's advising her husband on how to kill the king and how to get away with killing the king and what he must do in order to go undetected. He must appear on the outside like the innocent flower, but remain loyal on surface value, but remain murderous on the inside. So what I've said here is, in a nutshell, what it means is be two-faced. Look like one thing, but actually underneath it all, underneath that positive and innocent facade, you're quite the opposite. Why? In order to go undetected, he has to seem fair and honourable on the outside, but remain cunning and deadly on the inside, so that he has the courage and bravery, which I know sounds wrong when we're talking about somebody who's about to commit murder and kill a king, but in Lady Macbeth's eyes, that is what he needs. He needs courage and bravery in order to go ahead with it. And this is not the courage and bravery that is normally shown on the battlefield. It's a one where he has to become really deadly and serpent-like. And the next box asks you to complete single word analysis. And it's already stated what two words you should look at. The words being flower and serpent. So with regards to flower, the first thing you should do is look at the connotations. Okay, so what springs to mind when you think of a flower? I think of it as something that is harmless, something that is unthreatening, and also, interesting to note, something that is feminine. So in doing so, Lady Macbeth is telling Macbeth to look feminine, to seem woman-like. That's because women were seen to be kind, nice and weak, and that is exactly what he needs to look like in order to go undetected. I've then talked about how the flower imagery would allow him to essentially wear a coat of deception in order to fool others. So he has to keep up these pretenses of him being really innocent in order to carry out the deadly deed. And of course, I filled the whole box in without actually going on to serpent. So I've got a few notes here in relation to serpent. Serpent, what comes to mind straight away is something like a snake-like, something that's venomous, something that's murderous, something that's ready to strike. And Macbeth has to be ready. And if you think about Lady Macbeth's plan, you know, she is not waiting around. Duncan is going to come to their castle that night, and she doesn't want him to live throughout the night, okay? She doesn't want him to wake up that next morning and see the sun. So very much like a snake that is ready to strike, ready to pounce on its victim. That's what Macbeth has to basically be able to do. Also, serpent-like creatures are usually deemed as sly and stealth-like. Again, it relates to this idea of looking one way but being the other. So the theme of appearance versus reality is evident here, because she wants him to appear one way but in reality be really sly and stealthy like a serpent. And final point to mention, just with the single word analysis, is the fact that you could look at the two together, okay, and look at how they contrast, look at how they juxtapose, because the connotations of a flower contrast daily to the connotations of a serpent, okay. Next box then. The next box asks, how is Lady Macbeth challenging the traditional role of women through this quotation? And I've said here that Lady Macbeth becomes more masculine and accuses her husband of being feminine. So the more masculine she becomes, the less traditional she is, and the more control she gains as well by being masculine. And that's because, you know, women at the time were meant to be deemed as weak and, like I mentioned before, kind and innocent. And she doesn't want to be weak. She doesn't want to be kind. She doesn't want to be innocent. She wants to, you know, commit, or she plans to make her husband commit the worst crime imaginable, and that's killing a king and, you know, ruining the great chain of being. So yeah, she also accuses her husband of being feminine, and she sees that as a weakness. Earlier on, she talks about her husband being too full of human kindness. However, she does actually want him to be feminine-like on the outside, so that people don't detect him as a murderer, okay? Because they will then just deem him as a kind man or a weak man. I've also said how she challenges the traditional role because she's the temptress who causes Macbeth's downfall. So she isn't, you know, silent. She tempts, she manipulates, she controls the situation. All of these attributes are subversive to the traditional role of a woman in Jacobean times. Next box coincides with this previous box, actually. It relates to context, and it asks you, how could this quotation be alluding to Christianity and the creation story? So if you didn't know already, what it is linking to is the first book of Genesis and the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And that's because, you know, who he is writing for is a religious audience, the Jacobean church-going audience. And they would have looked at Lady Macbeth's actions and been reminded of both the serpent in the Garden of Eden through the reference here to the serpent, but also because of her manipulative language, they would have been reminded of Eve, okay? Because Eve, like Lady Macbeth, was the temptress. She tempts Adam to disobey God through her sinful and manipulative actions. Again, very much in parallel to Lady Macbeth's actions. Next box then, it says, how does this line put Lady Macbeth in control of her husband? Without repeating what I've already said about her power and her dominance, I thought of looking at single word analysis again and look at how she's being dominant, how she is in control of her husband through the words that's being used here. And Shakespeare's cleverly started this line with an imperative verb, look, okay, which essentially conveys the control that she has over her husband in a powerful manner. She is ordering him, she's instructing him, as to what he has to do. I think it's also interesting to note that she tells him how to look and how to be. So looking at the simile Shakespeare uses here to describe how he should look like the innocent flower, so similar to a flower, which suggests that, you know, it's not actually that strong, and it is just a facade. It's not the real thing. She doesn't really want him to be innocent. Okay, she wants him to murder a king. However, then Shakespeare uses the metaphor, but be the serpent underneath it, to show what is actually really important to Lady Macbeth. Yes, the facade, but ultimately the deed, the deadly deed, killing a king. So the metaphor seems to be more powerful here, which just emulates how much control she has over her husband, because she is able to signal to him, this is how you should act, but you must be this way underneath it all, and what she expects from her husband. She has incredibly high expectations. Next box. How can you connect this quotation to other areas of the text? There are many areas you could reference here. You could look at other animal imagery. For instance, when Macbeth talks about his mind being full of scorpions, what I've done is I've looked at one of the most important themes that you could link to this quotation, that's appearance versus reality, and thought about the first time this theme is evident, and that is right at the start, believe it or not, first scene, and it's the witches when they chant fair's foul and foul is fair, which essentially means, you know, nothing is what it seems. Don't trust what you deem to be worthy. And I guess they are giving us the tools to look at Macbeth and decide what he's like for ourselves, and, you know, not to be swayed by his valiant, honourable, soldier-like quality, because actually he's much more than that. And this can obviously lend itself to Lady Macbeth. She may seem innocent and kind, but actually things are not what they seem. She's the exact opposite. Which then made me think about relating it to Unsex Me Here. And this idea that Lady Macbeth, she feels like a man now, which is why she's dominant, why she's in control of her husband. And she sees her husband as woman-like. And she points out his feminine qualities and sees them as a weakness. So here I would just look at how this idea of the feminine and the masculine links to what she wants. She doesn't want to be feminine anymore because she sees it as weak. And last one, in relation to that deception, is Malcolm and Donna Blaine when they discover their father's being murdered. At night, they say there's daggers in men's smiles. And I would talk about how, you know, it's not going to be easy for Macbeth and Lady Macbeth to get away with their crime. As soon as the news is brought out that Duncan has been killed, his own children are very wary of absolutely everyone around them. They don't run away because they're weak and that they're cowards. They run because they can't trust anyone that should be loyal to them. And I guess they need to go further afield to plot a plan to get revenge, which is what they do. This box here, it asks, what is Shakespeare's authorial intent? Is he warning or encouraging us to be something we are not through this quotation? Authorial intent essentially means, you know, what does he want the audience to learn from his writings? And in particular, what does he want the audience to learn and understand from this quotation and Lady Macbeth's actions and mannerisms? I would hope that you would agree with me and say that he is certainly warning against being someone we are not, and not actually encouraging it. I've referenced the Genesis, book of Genesis here again. I've said through intertextuality, a text within a text, a reference to another text. With links here to the book of Genesis, Shakespeare is warning the audience of the danger Lady Macbeth and Macbeth will face, you know, if they are to go ahead with these actions, because we already know that it didn't work out well for Adam and Eve. So if they are to go ahead with these actions that won't work out for them. And therefore, audience members will then understand from this that it wouldn't work out for them either if they were to just, take matters into their own hands and kill a king or kill anyone for that matter. So essentially, he wants us to learn from their mistakes. Finally, the bottom box, which topics can this quotation be filed under? Appearance versus reality has already been done for you. And then I've added power and control, manipulation, evil, and Lady Macbeth and Macbeth's relationship. It could be quite a nice question. It could be quite likely, actually, that you would get a question on Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's relationship. And this quotation would be a great one to show who really dominates. Okay, thanks for listening. I hope it's helped.